Good Sunday afternoon and welcome to Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It's June 14th already. The month is half over, and I'd like to welcome you into the Deal today. We have a special program today. We're doing a joint program with Connections that's heard on Sundays on Foxy 107, 104, that's WFXC and WFXK in the Triangle area of North Carolina, but the program over terrestrial radio is heard everywhere from Greensboro all the way to Greenville and down to Wilmington and back across to Lumberton. We have a very wide footprint on the terrestrial radio side. We were fortunate enough to have Cal Cunningham be the guest on Connections this morning, and what we decided to do is to record that and make it available to people. Cal Cunningham is running for U.S. Senate against Thom Tillis, one of the most closely watched races in the country. The Senate's in the balance. The Democrats would need to regain control of the Senate to really move any legislation through, even though they've had the House over the last 2 years. They haven't been able to move much legislation because Mitch McConnell has refused to let things come to a vote on the Senate floor. So right now, having the Senate is the only way the Democrats can make any movement. That's with or without Donald Trump winning the re-election. In the meantime, we also want to talk about all the things that have been going on. Of course, in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing and Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, we've had people in to talk about that over the last few weeks. In the second and third portion of the show, I'll be talking with Val Atkinson. Again, we'll be using the material from earlier this morning from the radio. So you'll hear us mention Connections a couple of times. Again, this is a joint broadcast. So I want you to stay around. Coming up next is Cal Cunningham. He's a former military guy, was in the Army as a judge advocate general, a JAG officer, graduated from UNC Chapel Hill undergrad and graduate school. You'll hear more about him. And again, he's running against Thom Tillis for United States Senate seat to represent North Carolina. We'll be right back after these messages.
Happy birthday to you.
I've never done this before.
Happy birthday to you.
We're here for Precious.
Happy birthday, dear Precious.
Day 4.
You may not understand.
Happy birthday to you.
Yeah, this is chapter 32.
Good morning and welcome to Connections, North Carolina's #1 public affairs program, brought to you by Foxy 107, 104, and supported by A&H Productions. Hello out there in listener land. I'm Val Atkinson, your host, joined by Ed Clark, co-host, and we are so glad that you could join us this morning. Hope you're safe and well. We have a in-studio guest this morning that I know you've been chomping at the bits and waiting to hear from. And we're so glad that he could take out of his day the time to be with us. I speak of none other than the candidate for U.S. Senate for the state of North Carolina, Mr. Cal Cunningham. Cal, welcome to the show.
Val, thank you, Ed. Thank you both. Thanks to your listeners for making this opportunity possible. I'm grateful for the time, and we've got big challenges in front of us. I'm ready to roll up my sleeves and get into them.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's start right at it, because a lot of people want to know who you are and know a little bit more about you. So I've done a little research, and I've come up with the fact that you were born in Winston-Salem. You grew up in Lexington, but now you reside in Raleigh, which is wonderful. You've been around this state quite a bit, and you reside there with your wife, Elizabeth, and you have Will, your son, and Caroline, your daughter, and you guys are really good people in the Triangle now. So we welcome you back. And I say welcome you back because you had spent some time in the Triangle before. You studied at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where you received your baccalaureate degree in political science and philosophy. And then you went on to the London School of Economics, where you received your Master's of Science degree in public policy and public administration. And of course, you missed Chapel Hill, so you returned there again to do your Juris Doctor work and receive your law degree from UNC Chapel Hill. So I got
home as quick as I could. I
can imagine a native North Carolinian here. You served in the North Carolina General Assembly as a state senator. And of course, you're a JAG officer, and for people who don't have a military background, Judge Advocate General's Corps, with the 18th Airborne Corps, which is down at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. You've served tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. We could go on and on, but that's just a thumbnail sketch of some of the things you've done, Cal. And if people have questions, of course, we're going to find out that a little later. Let's dive right into it, and let me ask the going first question. Why did Cal Cunningham decide to run for the U.S. Senate at this time?
Val, that's a terrific question, and I'll tell you that the deepest and most personal answer is that I'm the parent of two teenage kids, and this country's on fire, and it's Dad's responsibility to put the fire out. Look, I love North Carolina. I love our country. You can tell from the life experiences that you just walked through that I know our state and I know it well. I believe strongly in service. It's deep in my bones. I learned it in the Presbyterian Church growing up in Lexington, in youth group and in scouting, and that we have a calling in this moment to give back, to serve each other. To be our brothers and sisters keepers. There's a biblical admonition in that we owe it to each other in this time. We find meaning and purpose by serving each other, but we also have an obligation in our short time on this planet to leave this world in a better place for the next generation. And I look to Caroline, I look to Will, I look to their generation, and we've been kicking the can down the road for quite some time. There are major problems in front of us. And I'd love the opportunity to roll up my sleeves in a state that I love and in a country that I love, to go to Washington and take on the biggest challenges in front of us. And there are many.
Absolutely. You know, many candidates running for federal office talk about what they're going to do once they get to Washington, and what they're going to stop and what they're going to start. And we realize there's just so much you can do going in initially. And one of the things that we try to determine who we send to Washington is based on who they are affiliated with and what they say during campaigns. If you are successful this November, have you given any thought to which committee assignments that may interest you somewhat more than some others based on what you want to do in the U.S. Senate?
Val, I have been thoughtful about that, and I'm actually having conversations with North Carolinians about those about that as well. You know, there are sort of two different worlds. Well, first of all, it's important to me to hear from North Carolinians. And part of the spirit of this campaign, part of the ethos that I want to bring to this seat in the U.S. Senate is that I want to be present and I want to be in the community. I want to be known and held accountable to work on the things that North Carolinians are raising up as the most important issues of our time. And so as I think about how best to serve, I would take the oath of office January the 3rd of 2021 and vow the first order of business that I'd like to take to Washington and that I'm hearing from North Carolinians is that we need some real government reform. There is a politics in Washington, a corporate and a political corruption that we are going to have to shake up. And part of that is not just about the people that we elect, but it's also about healing and reforming our institutions of government so that they are accountable and respond to the voters in the voting booth and not the corporate interests that are working Capitol Hill. So my first order of business is going to be to file legislation that will set in motion overturning a Supreme Court decision called Citizens United. And as you may know, Citizens United 10 years ago opened the floodgates to unlimited, unregulated corporate spending in our elections. And Val, you and I and everybody in North Carolina knows that that's distorting not only who wins elections, but it's also distorting the policy making going on in Washington. So first order of business is going to be about reform. But I've also been talking with North Carolinians about serving on judiciary in a state with a military presence and veterans presence like that we have, Veterans Affairs and Armed Services. There are big challenges in front of us in healthcare and the economy. So I'm looking at the committees that would be working on reducing the cost of prescription drugs, making sure that all North Carolinians have access to quality, affordable care. I'm looking at the committees that have jurisdiction over education. We have so much work to do to invest in our schools and support our educators and help our children know what the future can bring. And so I'm being thoughtful about it. I want to match up the needs that I'm hearing from North Carolinians with the opportunities that will present when we get to Washington. But I also share with you this. There's a world where I'm in Washington and we're dealing with a second Donald Trump term. And the work that I may do if we elect Joe Biden and the work that I may do if we reelect Donald Trump could be very, very different. So happy to talk more about that. But that's my thinking about it. And that's what I'm hearing from North Carolinians.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. You mentioned healthcare, Cal, and I know that's on the minds of most of our citizens here. We've gotten a spike recently here in North Carolina. And I was talking to Ed before the show started, and he wants to pose, I do believe, a few questions to you about COVID-19. Ed?
Yeah, definitely, Val. One of the things that obviously we're concerned about is the spike in COVID. I think North Carolina had led the nation really in the response. I mean, Governor Cooper did a really good job with the orders for people to stay at home and those kind of things. But obviously, the pressure to reopen the economy has been, people were out protesting, all of that. And obviously, people were losing jobs and there is a pressure to get back to normal, right? Whatever that is. However, one of the things that is revealed is that African Americans are more prone to COVID. People who are immunocompromised, older folks or whatever. I'm from Harnett County originally. There was a big outbreak there at a assisted living facility, and a number of people have died. And if you look at Harnett County's numbers based on the rest of the nation, it does not look good. We only got 120,000 people down there, and the deaths per 100,000 is astronomical compared to other places. What does Cal Cunningham in the Senate do to try to help get us to a place where there is better health care outcomes for not only African Americans, but all citizens? One of the problems we have here in North Carolina is we didn't do Medicaid expansion. So what do you bring to Congress that would help, to the Senate that would help with that?
Ed, look, thank you for also sharing a little bit about what you see in Harnett County. But I think it is worth us taking a moment about the fact that in a state where about 22% of our citizens are Black, the almost twice that rate of infections among African Americans and deaths too. We get to this lays bare the fact that we have very real health inequities in North Carolina and in America. And I think we should take a moment to make sure we understand this exposes work that we need to do. You're exactly right about Medicaid expansion. Look, Medicaid, even before COVID-19, we had over 1 million North Carolinians that didn't have access to quality, affordable care because they didn't have coverage. And we could close that gap by some 600, maybe 650,000 of our people by simply taking the money that we're sending to Washington and we're already paying for it, and bringing it back home and expand Medicaid. That could be 40,000 healthcare jobs. That's going to help our rural hospitals. That's going to help with the fact we got 85,000 opioid dependent North Carolinians who would have care if we expanded Medicaid. And so one of the things I've been calling for in this campaign, and as part of my COVID response plan, is originally the Medicaid expansion, federal government would pay 100%. That went down to 90%, and our hospitals offered to pick up the difference. I think we go back to 100%. There are 14 states here that have not expanded Medicaid, many of them in the South, and the need is great. The opportunity to help our citizens is right in front of us. Now, my opponent, he proudly passed the law. He says he was proud of it, making it, quote, illegal to expand Medicaid in North Carolina. I don't understand how you do that. So then before we even got to COVID-19, we were more vulnerable. The kindling was already dry on the forest floor. And when the virus sparks landed on it, it's burning, and it's burning hard here. There's a lot we need. We got to work on supporting and building off the Affordable Care Act. I'd like to see us add a public option to that could help folks that come off of employer-based care. That Medicaid expansion is important. Reducing out-of-pocket costs for prescriptions and giving Medicare the right to negotiate for lower prescription drug costs. We have a lot of work to do in healthcare, but I think we should also not lose sight, Ed, of the fact that in this moment, we see that some of the building blocks of health, access to food, the quality of the community that you live in, the education opportunities available, that some of the key building blocks of health are missing, and particularly for African Americans in this state. It shows us once again that we have not made the more perfect union that we should aspire to. And I'd like to roll up my sleeves and work on exactly that.
Cal, you mentioned that, of course, we have 22% of the population here in North Carolina are African Americans. And of that, we make up 20% of the electorate. And by all accounts, there's going to be a huge Black voter turnout this fall. And they'll mostly be concerned with the presidential race, I'll give you that. But there's another race, as you alluded to earlier, that's critically important, that even if Joe Biden is successful or unsuccessful, the US Senate is going to be paramount in determining where we go and how fast we go and what we accomplish when we're going that way. Talk a little bit about, if you could, the importance of picking up those 4 seats in the US Senate races this year.
Val, I'm glad that you raised that topic. When we win this race for US Senate here in North Carolina, when I unseat Thom Tillis, it's not just going to be good for North Carolina. It's going to give us an opportunity after his 17 years in public office, 10 years holding gavels, whether that's in the State House or in the U.S. Senate. It's going to give us an opportunity to lead this country, lead this state, and do things for North Carolina that we haven't had an opportunity to do in recent years. But you put your finger on it, Val. When we win North Carolina in this U.S. Senate race, we're taking the gavel away from Mitch McConnell in Washington. And Mitch McConnell has shown time and time again on issue after issue that he is not prepared. He is unwilling, intentionally unwilling to govern this country. They're up there cramming ideologues onto our federal courts while failing to take up hundreds of pieces of legislation that passed the U.S. House of Representatives, including some of them passing by overwhelming bipartisan majorities that support veterans, that do things for our Veterans Administration, that help out working families, that help raise wages and deal with healthcare costs for people. On issue after issue, they're landing on his desk, and he's proudly, enabled by a Thom Tillis, just refusing to take them up. So North Carolina, this race is important for North Carolina, and my job is to keep laser focused on the needs of our people right here. But when we win this is a tipping point for the nation. So we have to win it. We have to win it.
Absolutely. And I'll tell you, time really flies, Cal, when you're having fun. But normally when we have guests such as yourself, we'd like to save a couple of minutes at the end for any parting shots that you may have. And I'd like for you to leave some contact points as to how some of our listeners can get in contact with you and your campaign if they have questions or would like to make comments. So take the floor, it's yours for the next couple of minutes.
Well, you're kind, Val, for you and Ed both for having me on. I hope that this is the first in many opportunities for us to share, and I would love to engage with your listeners. I would encourage all of your listeners who are interested that, first of all, I'm going to fight for every vote. I'm going to be in the community making the case for why this matters, and I want to be held accountable as the next U.S. Senator for North Carolina to work on the things that really matter for our people. And that I mean that very sincerely. Anybody listening who wants to get in touch, come to my website at cal4nc, CALFORNC.com. You can also catch me on Twitter and on Facebook and on Instagram, all the social media outlets. But contact us, info@cal4nc.com, or even cal@cal4nc.com. Let me tell you this, because I'd love to leave your listeners with this thought. I took an oath to this nation years ago to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I went to Iraq and I went to Afghanistan to deal with those challenges overseas. But I don't think I ever imagined that the biggest challenges in front of our nation would be in Washington, D.C. itself. And so my goal here, as we talked about today, is to go to Washington and take on the corruption that's standing in the way of progress on the big issues of our time, in healthcare, in education, in jobs, in criminal justice reform. And we haven't had a chance to talk about that yet here today. There are voices in the streets today expressing hurt and pain and anger, and we need to channel those into change and reform and accountability. Now, my opponent in the push and pull of Washington politics has decided something's more important than representing North Carolinians. He's put the special interests and corporate interests ahead of North Carolina's interests time and time again. So I'm going to work hard for North Carolina. I'd be very grateful for the support of North Carolinians. Let's go to Washington. Let's work on reform. Let's get the big issues moving. And thank you. I look forward to coming back and being with your listeners again.
We'll make that happen, Calvin. Thank you so much. I'll tell you, I heard that music in the background. It means we got to go on a commercial break. And thank you, and thank your supporters and your staff for setting this up. And believe me, we'll be back with you again, arrange another visit with you, our guest today, Cal, for the U.S. Senate representing the great state of North Carolina. Thank you.
Thanks, Val. Thanks, Ed.
Good morning and welcome back to this, our second segment of Connections. I'm Val Atkinson, your host, joined by A. Clark, co-host, and we are discussing in this segment some calls and contacts from some of our listeners to try to make up for not being live on the air. As most of our regular listeners know, this show is taped on Fridays now that we don't go into studio, and it's played back on Sunday morning. And of course, when you're listening to it on Sunday mornings, you don't have a chance to call in. But you can call in, text in, leave voice messages, send emails or whatever during the week. And we will handle your issue during that next show. And the number is 919-656-5240, 919-656-5240, or you can email, if you like, to ncblackvote, ncblackvote@gmail.com. Ed, I thought it was an interesting and highly successful first segment we just had there with Cal Cunningham, talking about his positioning to change the representation in Congress in this U.S. Senate, trying to get Thom Tillis out of there. And I thought you made a very, very good point. We talked a little bit off mic about the criticality of North Carolina in all of this, because it's one of the 4 seats that's needed to overturn the Senate.
Right.
And there are 22 senators running. And if the Democrats can hold on to the seats they have, and win 4 of the seats 4 of the 22 that the Republicans are running in, then there is an opportunity here to take back the Senate, which is critically important. You and I talk all the time about people who don't like the way Donald Trump is doing things. Well, he couldn't do a thing in the world without the U.S. Senate having his back. It's the U.S. Senate that's allowing him to do all. He couldn't appoint any judges. He couldn't get anything through Congress. Nothing. I mean, he would be impotent, would be a good word describing him. He couldn't do anything. So the key here is, first of all, let's take the Senate back. And then if we take the presidency back or not, we still cut out all of the foolishness that the president has been doing.
Yeah, and it's entirely possible to win that seat, Val. You know, people forget real quick, but, you know, Terry Sanford had one of those seats before, and so did Kay Hagan. So we've had more progressive people serve in the Senate from North Carolina who can win a statewide race in North Carolina. Governor Cooper proved that you can win a statewide race and be a Democrat and be more progressive. This Senate thing, though, is really troubling because Mitch McConnell has, and Cal alluded to this, has pretty much gummed up the works. The only thing that happens now is judicial appointments for the most part. They can get them out of committee, they can get them voted on, and those judges get appointed. And it's making a really big change to the court. But what people don't realize, and again, elections have consequences. When you have a circuit court judge or one of those federal appellate judges that is sitting there and has to hear a case about police brutality or about whatever, pick a topic, and he's already predisposed to be a certain way because they're part of the Federalist Society, or they used to work for ALEC or one of those right-wing groups. You have no chance. And that's what I'm trying to tell people, is that you have to think about this in totality. Donald Trump is a horrible president. However, he is not the only problem, like you keep saying. Mitch McConnell is just as big a problem, but we can't vote Mitch McConnell out, but we can vote Cal Cunningham in and take away the majority from the Republicans, and then Mitch McConnell has to sit on the sidelines, and Chuck Schumer or whoever emerges as the leader on the Democratic side becomes the leader of the Senate.
Absolutely, and that needs to be the goal. People don't need to get into the polling booth and start asking themselves, well, who is this guy that I'm running, that I should be voting for? And, well, we want to make sure that that's not the case here. But we'll see how that works out. I'd like now, Ed, if I might, let's go into some of the calls and emails and other things that folks have left. First, there was a voicemail left by Laura from Johnston County. And I say that with emphasis because Johnston County is the birthplace of yours truly, and it's where my father's side of the family hails from. So I know a lot of people in that area, Johnston County, North Carolina. Laura wanted us to know that come July 1st of this year, next month, we'll have a new superintendent of schools in Johnston County, North Carolina, and it'll be the first time we've had an African American in that position, Dr. Eric Bracey. Dr. Eric Bracey will become the new superintendent of public instruction, the superintendent of schools, it's called at the county level, for the county of Johnston. And I'll tell you why that's so critically important. History will show you that politically speaking, Johnston County is one of the more conservative counties in North Carolina, if not the nation. It has prided itself in the past of having a sign as you approach Johnston County on Route 70 that says, "Welcome to the land of the Klan." And it was no joke. The Ku Klux Klan was big in Johnston County, North Carolina. And to arise from that point and get to the point that you are doing better in schools and you're electing some local officials, you have some police officers, some people on your county board of county commissioners, and in particular town aldermen and those kind of things are being elected. Johnston County is making progress. And this is a point in time which they think should be celebrated. And Laura, because of you, many other people outside Johnston County know about this now. So thank you so much for giving us that information. Linda in Franklinton County wanted to make sure people knew that teachers should be considered essential employees. And we think that, although some people don't think that they are, Linda, but we appreciate you saying that. And the last one was from Sharon from Edgecombe County. And she wanted us to know that police officers need much, much more training than they are getting right now. And Ed, I want to put a pin in that and take that out and talk about that a little bit, because that leads us into George Floyd and a lot of other things that are going on. Training is one thing, but without accountability, training doesn't mean very much. So, there's got to be accountability there. I think some of the rules and ordinances in place to protect the police and almost make them above the law has to be looked at and challenged if we are going to have an equal application of the law throughout the city or state that these law enforcement officials are operating in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the last piece I wrote, Val, for my blog was about that very thing, about how police unions, the contracts that are negotiated are all tilted in favor of not necessarily helping the people in the community, but helping the police not get in trouble when they've done something bad. Now, policing is a hard job. Let's not candy coat this. Policing, however, has turned into sort of a paramilitary force in the United States where people are in fear of the police. I was thinking back the other day, Val, you and I did some training for some police officers before. We talked to them, and I think it was down to Apex and maybe Holly Springs about, police stops and how to interact with folks who are African American. That there's a different feeling when you stop them. And the irony of it is, and you probably, like most black men, have been stopped a lot of times, And one of the stories I related to those police officers is that I drove through Holly Springs and Fuquay every day for years on the way to RTP to work. And I would get stopped constantly, but never had a ticket. And the officers were always bellicose towards me, ready to fight or ready to assume that I had some violation. And then they were always taken aback that I had never even had a ticket for anything. And so we're contending with that on top of the people who get hired into police departments. So you tell me, Val, you're one of the experts on this. Why do municipalities end up hiring these folks into police departments who don't really have I think the requisite disposition to deal with the public?
Ed, I think there's a disconnect between hiring standards and training, hiring standards and the culture of the police department. There may be some qualifications that need to be met to be hired to be a law enforcement official. But the training really reflects the protection needed to keep police officers safe. The culture really reflects making sure the police officer is protected and has rights and is not taken advantage of. So once that person is hired, it becomes a whole different set of challenges and missions and goals. Once that person is hired, then one of the goals seem to be, to me, the protection and the rights of the police officer himself, not for the community. And the other part of the culture that's really feeding into this, Ed, is the culture of the boogeyman out there. The 6'4", 250-pound guy with almost 0% body fat on him. You can know that this is a big, muscular guy. And some incoming police officers are made to think that this is the boogeyman. If you see that guy, you've got to show him who's in charge. The first thing you've got to do is to make sure that nobody thinks that you are afraid of him, that he should be the guy that's afraid of you. If it means throwing him on the ground, putting the handcuffs on him behind his back, making him cry out for his mama, whatever you got to do, make sure you send a message to everybody else that you're in charge, although you're only 5'9", 160 pounds soaking wet. Make sure they know that you're in charge because you have a badge and a gun. And too many police officers, they take that to heart, and that's the way they treat too many African Americans. And African Americans are beginning to say, hey, I haven't done anything wrong. Why are you treating me this way? Now that a lot of these police officers are seeing that as insubordination. You don't ask the questions I do. I'm in charge here. This may be your community, but I'm in charge. So there is a conflict in the beginning of who these community people think they are and how they think they should be treated. There's a conflict between that and the police officers who have another version of who they are, how they should be respected, what their anticipations are. They are going in, Ed, thinking that they need to put fear in everybody in that community so everyone in that community knows who's in charge. And if you interact with one of these police officers and you don't act like you are afraid, and you act like you are a citizen of the United States and you have rights, you could end up on the other side of the grass in a box.
Yeah.
Very easily.
Very easily. And that's what happened with George Floyd. I guess the world's really strange too. Connections between places and people. You figure out that George Floyd is actually born in Fayetteville, North Carolina, right? He has a funeral down in Rayford. My pastor from my church that I grew up in delivered the prayer at the service, and people that I know sang in the choir during the service. I go to Minneapolis all the time, and I've been in that store where George Floyd got murdered. You know, it's all these close connections that we have all the time that bring this home, that it could have been anybody else. And I guess what bothers me, Val, is that the protests happened and people are out in the streets and the demanded justice and that kind of thing. I'm glad that the police officers were arrested, but here comes the next part. And again, I need to come back to you to think about this politically. Police departments get their charge from local people, from city councils and mayors and those kind of things. And a lot of times we're talking about the president, and we're talking about, in this case, this morning, we're talking about Cal Cunningham and Thom Tillis running for the Senate. Maybe there are some laws that you could pass on the national level about no chokeholds or whatever, but local governments hire these police chiefs and negotiate with these police unions. Are we missing something by not focusing enough on these city councils and these agreements that cities have with police departments?
Absolutely, Ed. I think you're absolutely correct here. What citizens need to do is to go into contract with these people that you are thinking about voting for, whether it means city council, mayor, county commissioner, or whatever, and have a verbal contract or some kind of understanding that your vote is contingent upon them taking a firm stand with police and police unions, that they should not take campaign contributions from police unions, and that they are very transparent in all of the negotiations with police unions and police officers. Because I think the elected officials are the ones that are in the position of controlling this matter, Ed, because they are getting too many campaign contributions from the wrong places. And now they can't act in our behalf, which they supposedly work for us. They can't act in our behalf because they're too busy falling over themselves trying to make sure that the police and the police unions know that they have their back. And in many cases, that's not a good thing to do. So the people have to apply the pressure to the elected officials and ask them to do their job and apply pressure to the police chief and to the police unions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I am waiting to see what happens here in North Carolina. I mean, places like Raleigh, I think there's been a lot of calls for the police chief to resign and things like that. And in some cases that is warranted, but I'm more concerned about whether or not people understand exactly how the police get funded. We talked about training like before, whether or not they're trained appropriately, they understand. I'm also wanting to know where these police officers come from. In a lot of cases, they don't even live in the communities that they serve. People come from out of town, from, if you're in Raleigh, they might live in Fuquay or some other place. And then they're coming in to work in neighborhoods where they don't really respect the people and they fear the people. And that's one of the things I'm concerned about, this fear of Black people right off the bat, and then the over policing. Like, for example, the whole George Floyd situation revolved around a possible, and it's still not clear yet, a possible counterfeit $20 bill that did not get spent in the store. And that's what I keep trying to tell people, that the store turned down the $20 bill. He did not spend the $20 bill in the store. And these stories get distorted. So it's too much to think about sometimes, Val.
Absolutely. But I want to talk about that a little bit on the other side, because you brought up some great issues. And we're going to have to take a pause for the cause of this particular time. But when we come back, we'll take up that whole position of residency as a requirement in hiring people, and not only residency, but assignments as well. So stay with us, folks. We're going to discuss that and more when we return after these messages. welcome back to this, our final segment of Connections. I'm Val Atkinson, your host, joined by Ed Clark, co-host. And we are, in this segment, we are discussing actions of our local police and law enforcement officials. But before we get started on this segment, Ed, I'd like to leave our contact points to our listeners. Our new methodology here is that if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, please do so during the week by leaving us a message, and we will handle that comment or question as we did this morning with comments from Laura, Linda, and Sharon. So please leave us a message at 919-656-5240 or ncblackvote@gmail.com, and we'll handle that. Ed, moving on to practices of hiring, because like you said, you and I have done some training before. I think hiring is particularly interesting. When I lived in DC, there was a measure that was being considered by the DC Council that would have a residency requirement, because the vast majority of people that were on the DC Police Department lived in Maryland. There were a few lived in Virginia, but the overwhelming majority lived in Maryland. Very few people lived in DC because this was right after the '68 riots, or just a few years after that. And there was white flight. People were moving to the suburbs. So if white police officers were hired onto the force, the last thing they wanted to do was to move to Southeast or Northeast DC. And they couldn't afford some of the apartments in Northwest DC or Southwest DC. So they moved out to the suburbs and lived there. So they were not DC residents. And some people have asked the question, and still are, how would that change things if we had to get our law enforcement officials from the very community that they are charged with policing? They would already know who the people are. They come there with a different mindset. And I would go further than to say that just the residency thing, because you could be from Chevy Chase, Maryland, take a job with the police department, and then move to Southwest DC, right? Now, we don't want that. We want you to have already had a residency established in the district, preferably in the neighborhood that you want to police. And if before we put you in Southeast Raleigh, over there around Martin Luther King Boulevard, or Good Hope Road, as we used to call it, let's see where you live. If you lived off Minnesota Avenue and Good Hope Road, fine. For 15 years, I'd love to put you back there as a police officer walking that beat, because you know everybody and everybody knows you and they know your family. You're going to have a different relationship with everybody you try to police. And my assumption, Ed, is that the crime rate would go down dramatically, because these people would be able to de-escalate and manage things without handcuffing people, making them kiss the pavement, putting chokeholds on them and throwing them in the back of the car. Yeah. They would have many other ways to handle this problem. I think that's one of the solutions that I would pursue.
Yeah, you're right. I'm a firm advocate that the police officers need to be from the communities that they serve. But I want to throw a monkey wrench into it, and that's a lot of the younger protesters that have been out there. They've been talking about defunding the police without necessarily explaining exactly what that means. And their police reforms in some cases is to eliminate the policing altogether. I think there's a fine line. Do you understand what they're saying when they're saying defund the police? A lot of these young kids out there that are carrying the signs, or do you think they've explained it adequately?
I understand, and no, they have not explained it adequately. I think what they mean is take a look at where your money is going to do what with the police department, and make some decisions as to what they really need and what they don't need. But defund the police in no way means let's eliminate the police department and let's have a community without any law enforcement. Nobody believes that. But that's the position that the right or the other side wants you to argue about. They want the argument between should we or should we not have police officers. You know, they'll win that argument every time. But that's not the argument. The question is, what are the resources that police departments need? Do they need a Sherman tank? Well, what about cruise missiles, you know, or B-2 bombers? I mean, where does it stop when you talk about needs of the police department? Where does it stop, you know? Yeah. And I think it stops with budget writing, because that's the way it is in most agencies. Most agencies determine exactly what type of missions and what types of goals that department will have based on the way they're funded.
Right.
And that's all we're saying. We'll control funding, which will ultimately control what you do and how you do your job.
Right. Yeah. This is the crazy part. When you say Sherman tank, it's not even tongue in cheek. It's real. Some police departments have tanks and armored personnel carriers, the same ones that you would see in Afghanistan and Iraq. They have weapons. They come completely dressed out as if they're going to raid a place in Fallujah, as opposed to West Raleigh or Durham. It's off-putting to me, especially in light of stuff like the no-knock warrant, that helped kill Breonna Taylor in Louisville, Kentucky. The police, when they released the police report, they had no information on it, about what they did or if anybody was injured or whatever. In addition to that, they had these no-knock warrants, and I'm pretty sure they were dressed to the hilt, because I think they've lived through these TV shows like Cops and Live PD. And within the last week, both of those programs have been canceled, I understand, because they know that people have actually died in the custody of police doing these shows, because the police have almost been like acting in a reality show. Like the president acts as if he's in a reality show leading the country. And so one of the things that I guess I've been trying to caution people about is think critically about what their police department is going to look like, because you're right. We're not going to have no police. We have to have a police department. What does that realistically look like? For me, it's police without Sherman tanks. Like you said, that makes no sense at all. I think there's an over-policing and a militarization of the police, and I'd like to stop. And so let's make it full circle. If a person like Cal Cunningham goes to the Senate, one of the things that I would be pushing him on is making sure that money that Congress allocates for policing won't allow them to buy military-style weapons or military-style, tanks or whatever,
Absolutely. That's the way it needs to be. There needs to be some kind of hold on that. And I think where you start with that is we need to be extra careful what type of contracts we sign with these police unions. Because what is happening now, police unions are running these police departments. And they are determining what police do, the power they have, if you can fire them or not, how much you pay them. And that's not what it was intended to happen. It was intended that that the police chief and appointed boards and elected officials through the public that votes for them, that this group would run police departments and not the police union. And the police unions have figured out a way to turn this on its head. And now, because they're unionized and they're paying dues, there are lots of money here. They make campaign contributions. They allow candidates for office to have access to their rosters and that kind of thing, to send out campaign flyers and all of these things. And now they are a political organization. And it's gone too far. Any and all remedies for the problems that we find ourselves having now regarding law enforcement needs to include law enforcement unions. Because if it does not include that, we're not being holistic in our approach.
Yeah, I'm gonna ask you one of the, because I know we're gonna run out of time because we never have enough time. But in light of, like I said, all the protests have been going on, I'm really afraid of this COVID-19 reemerging. I mean, we have terrible numbers in North Carolina. Have you been seeing anything, relative to that? I know we talked to Cal Cunningham about it a little bit, but there's still no national response to COVID. The president hasn't done anything. The numbers keep increasing. He seems not to have suffered any penalty for that from the way it looks. And so now he's going to shift his focus to being law and order, because that's all he posts on his Twitter now is law and order. What's realistic about, what we can do about COVID? I mean, other than continue to educate people to wear masks and do the social distancing.
I don't think there's too much can be done, Ed, because the president's you don't have anybody in a position of leadership. The president's position has been one of protecting the economy, and he sees this whole coronavirus issue as something that's getting in the way of his prime campaign issue, which is the economy. That's what he was going to run on. And so he will risk lives. He'll do whatever he has to do. To him, it's not a big thing if 19,000 people congregate in a particular place and they become infected and go back and infect a lot of other people. He has no problem with that as long as the economy kicks back. Now, this is where he's not being very intelligent. I'm not saying he's intelligent on any other area, but this is where he's not being intelligent at all.
For sure.
For sure. Once these people become infected for a second time, or once we have a spike, there's going to be a big runaway or turnaround from reopening. People are going to be afraid to sit down in a restaurant, to go to a game, because they are afraid now that they become infected and they see another spike. And they are going to be ready to try what I call the Asian option here. There was a piece on MSNBC earlier this week that talked about Asian countries seems to be more successful than European and countries and North American countries. And why is that? It's lifestyle. It's lifestyle that the European countries and the North American countries can't wait to get out and have fun and go sailing and ski, doing all of the wonderful things that people do that's got a lot of money and got a lot of weapons to make other people do what they want them to do. They want to enjoy it. They want to have their paradise in peace, okay? They want to enjoy that. So they don't want to be hunkered down in some basement somewhere waiting for this thing to ride out. Wherein, on the other hand, a lot of these other people from other countries, they have become accustomed to this. They don't need to get on their Walmart swagger in order to feel good about themselves, okay? And it was okay for them to stay home for a period of time. It was okay for them to do whatever was necessary, sanitation, hand washing, wearing masks, to do whatever was necessary to get rid of it. And now they are fine. And now they can go back if they choose to. If we keep running up to the line and then falling back and running up to the line and falling back, we may be with this virus for a long, long time, Ed, and that's not good for anyone.
No, it's not.
Well, I'm going to put a pin in it right there. I tell you, time flies when you're having fun. And we're going to see if we can get more time. But right now, we're coming to the end of our show, so we'll have to ask you, as we always do, folks, during the coming week and weeks, we want you to be good to other people. But more importantly, folks, please be good to yourself. Ciao.